You've come to the right place. Well done on having answered all of those questions. There were quite a few of them. The very fact that you've actually gone this far and answered this satellite scan and are curious about what's going to come next, about how to analyze all of that data, is the fact that you're interested in personal growth. That's great, because at the moment in the world, it seems that many people are very busy pointing their fingers outside to other people and saying it's this person, this government, this leader. Really, in communication, everybody has a role to play. The fact that you're looking into the mirror and that I'm going to guide you through this process of introspection, you are taking one step towards taking responsibility for your communication behaviors in this world. So well done, and thank you for that. You did the scan, and now we're going to analyze it with these 8 lenses with your dashboard. You probably want to have your dashboard either printed or on a separate screen. But before I go into the whole logistic setup of how to use this, I invite you to just sit back, make yourself comfortable. It's going to be long. I'm going to chapter it into these topics in the YouTube video. You can add comments and questions about any of this. I will add the time codes for each of these so you can come in and out of this video at your own rhythm. Why is this even useful? A lot of people have reported benefits from doing this introspective journey that you're currently doing with the scan and then the analysis and self-reflection. One of the things that's happening at the moment is there's a rise of awareness around emotional intelligence. One thing you'll get from this is understanding where your mental models and your internal feelings and focuses of intentions are affecting your emotions and affecting your emotional connection to other people. Boundaries is something that is surprisingly unspoken, even though it's a critical thing. There's a whole amount of work right there at measuring boundary setting and understanding when and how to set boundaries so that it's not too much or not enough. That's something that you'll get some clarity on with this snapshot of communication. Collective problems here is something that it's really always surprising me how little people are using collective intelligence. Even though there might be people sitting in a room, great bunch of experts, and I've been in meetings with incredibly intelligent people who are incapable of using their collective intelligence. They can just tap into their individual and ego intelligence. This scan is going to help you also find ways and strategies to tap into your collective intelligence with any group of people, family or work. This is the key. Today, the word conflict is usually projected on the outside, interpersonal conflict between people, conflicts between states. I'm also going to be talking about internal conflicts, which are the source of the other conflicts on the outside. Internal, in your head, tensions and conflicts, which can be turned into trust and creativity. I'll show you exactly how that is on different lenses. You'll see a lot about this topic. Drama is something that we're unfortunately addicted to. If you've ever been at 2 in the morning, sitting there on your favorite series, binge watching that, you know how addictive drama can be. The problem with that is that as entertaining as it is, often we're basically projecting drama onto people and situations without realizing it. So I'm going to show you how to use this data to measure that you're not doing that and how to fix it if you are. Micro habits. If you've been reading James Clear Atomic Habits book, it's really interesting how he simplifies the behavioral science and behavioral change to little incremental habit changes. If you're interested in making a micro habit out of this data, the whole periodic table that you'll see in a second is based on the idea of building micro habits for communication. I'll give you a template, I'll show you the steps. If you want to do your own micro habit, I'll show you how. It can help you really easily shift things without too much effort. Empathy. I'm trained as an anthropologist, so empathy is part of our toolkit to go and interact with people in new social bubbles. The thing with empathy is that you can take it too far. There's a lot of fashion at the moment to talk about how empathy is important. Look at Chris Voss from the FBI. His whole career took a turn when his government said to him, you have to start looking at what science says about psychology and empathy so that you can do a better job. That shifted his whole way of dealing with hostage negotiation. In every field of work, home, the whole psychological safety and empathy are connected. People are starting to go, how do I get more empathy? One of the big challenges is knowing when to balance empathy with self-empathy. So balance respect of self with respect of others. That kind of dynamic is something I'll give you some insights on through different lenses as well. Some people have said that this is probably the most effective way of measuring their communication needs. Conflicts are often really just about unfulfilled needs that haven't been either identified and unfulfilled or unexpressed. I'll show you how to measure different levels of needs that you might have, that you might not be aware of, that can help you formulate to other people and therefore transform conflicts. Self-reliance is about learning how to hack into your own flow. Some people go to meetings with the idea that necessarily going to be difficult, challenging, and uncomfortable. Particularly if they label themselves as introverts, they might already enter that conversation with a sort of mindset of it's going to be hard work. You can hack with the same way that you design games, and I'll show you the flow theory, how it works in communication and how we've measured it here. You can actually make your conversations flowing just by the way you organize them. I'll show you where you are in that and how you can fix that with two different lenses. The last thing is the thing I wish we would be teaching in schools at an early age, how to detach from ego. It means that first of all, we need to understand what ego means, so I'll take you through that, but also how to step away from it and not let it run the conversation. Ego is fine, it's just how do we use it? That's something I'll show you very concretely, what your ego is doing, how it's measured, what you can do to play with it in a way that is very helpful of connection with other people. Plenty of things that you can get out of it. If you really want to get the maximum benefit out of this, I'd recommend that you jot down what is either triggering you or that you become curious about or that you are particularly unclear about, and then you can type it in a question and I'll do my best to answer it in the YouTube video. My name is Estève and I'm a communication anthropologist, initially trained in Loughborough University as a human factors engineer. I've spent 25 years studying people's behavior, what they really actually do rather than what they think they do and they say they do, in many different work bubbles, personal life bubbles. The whole of my work has been focused on understanding how to build better human connections, because there's a lot of designers working on interface between machines and humans, but there's surprisingly few people who are really working on designing the interface between humans, like improving that, other than individual tools for one job at a time. So that's been the field, and that's how I came up with the periodic table of conscious communication, which some of you have seen if you've looked at the website. It's really just using the metaphor of chemistry to symbolize what metacognition really is. The idea of metacognition is that, of course, humans are animals, but one of the things that makes us slightly different animals than others is that we have very strong capacity for stepping back and looking at ourselves from a distance, metacognition. And metacognitive communication is just a new language, a new codified set of terms in 4 levels, which are describing how people interact, how they get on with each other, how they also think of getting along with each other, which is the bottom of the periodic table. If you've been learning a development language as a programmer, or if you're a linguist learning other languages, you can spend hundreds and hundreds of hours learning a skill that you're going to use in a specific context with a specific group of people. Now, imagine that this is a new language that you're learning called metacognition, with all these 130 little Lego blocks. If you learn about all of those, that language that you're learning is going to be useful in literally every single human interaction and every interaction with yourself, which is pretty much the whole time. So it's a worthwhile investment because you get to use this logic and science to help you get along with people in any work, hobby, or family situations. It's quite a good return on learning investment if you want to think of it like that. Now, what is this periodic table? It's really on 4 levels. You have the verbal level, which is universal patterns of how people talk or write. Non-verbal is the for example, timing, how people are communicating, the rhythm, intonation, the body language, this kind of thing. And then the intentions is why people are even communicating in the first place. Are they talking out of curiosity or out of anger or spite? Sometimes it's expressed, often it's not. There's a whole set of patterns that are universal there as well. And then the bottom bit with the white icons is all the mental models that you use to understand the other 3 levels. When you understand a new mental model, it unlocks completely new levels of interaction with people, like if it was a video game. By far the most interesting in this periodic table, if you want to make quantum leaps in personal growth, is to focus on the bottom white mental models level, which is why I'm going to take you through the data and really focus on a couple of those. I opened them up for you in depth so that you understand how to make sense of your data with those. That's really going to be structured with these 8 lenses, and the video, as you will be able to go backwards and forwards, I'm going to go into one lens at a time, but there will be a lot of links between lenses that are obvious. Each one of you has got a dashboard, a set of slides that has your name in it. I've created myself one here as a demo with all of the content with my own personal data. So this is me being vulnerable with my own data, but I'm going to use it as a demonstration of how to read data rather than talk in general. I'm going to use my own data, and then we can talk imaginary situations of if it was different like this or like that, open up possible scenarios of data analysis together. That dashboard is a PDF that you've received hopefully in the same email where this video is. Once you have that, it would be probably a good idea for you to pause this video and either take it on a separate screen or print it. Maybe just the 3 white pages at the back are worth printing. The actual report itself has got some process steps, which is like things to do in that order to understand before you go and look at your results in the 8 colored lenses. Okay, so they're numbered, you can go backwards and forwards, but I'm pretty much going to follow the sequence of these lenses as I walk through. I'll just go back a little bit more about this, the 8 lenses. We've talked about the 10 benefits. We'll talk a little bit about the levels of focus to use this to calibrate yourself. Before we go any further, there's a how-to. What you have is 3 printable white sheets. I would recommend you print those if you like writing stuff down. They're kind of worksheets that I've designed. I use them in my coaching sessions. It's a way of building a micro habit. It's a way of giving yourself a summary. And also, if you have ADHD and if you're wanting to scribble around and do things because you want to keep attention, there's one sheet where you can mark down the elements that you have high or low scores, for example. So it's worth printing if you enjoy the paper as a focus point. The video that you're watching now, that's the QR code that you can always come back to later from your dashboard. One thing that's worth noting is that there's lots of these little elements, which are the squares that you find in the periodic table. They have a 4-numbered reference on the top and connected to data. So you will be able to always know what you're measuring from the periodic table like that. There's a little description, which in this video you won't be able to read. The print is too small, but in your dashboard, you'll be able to read the description of that data. And then underneath in gray is really for coaching sessions where I might look at the actual data points themselves with somebody and go deeper into the data. So that's just the data label. So that's basically, if you want to go deeper, we have a YouTube channel and we gradually build every week content on each of those elements. If you subscribe to the channel there, you'll be able to get all those different elements that are in production for the periodic table. You'll still find quite a few of them already there, and I've built a library for you on the website as well that you can easily click into. This is more like an overview introduction to the whole topic of metacognitive communication. There you'll find lots of references to go deeper into a particular topic if you're interested. These are the printables. This is the summary notes I take for high scores, low scores for each lens, and take overall notes of what's insightful, interesting, or questions on my mind. This is all the periodic table elements numbered, but in gray so that you can color them in, draw them, tick them, add notes to them, whatever you want. And this is a template for building yourself a micro habit. I'll walk you through that. This is a fake sheet that I built for today. Well, I'll be doodling stuff here as I go along. Micro habit. Just a little pause on what is a micro habit. James Clear, Atomic Habits, talks a lot about the science of behavior change and how it's just very powerful to do when a little trigger comes, time, for example, a day, interaction with a particular person, social media channel. When that happens, you go off the autopilot and you start a new intention, action, and word. In our case, it's 3 different levels. I'll walk you through why we have those 3 levels later. That leads to a reward that usually creates a dopamine loop, which gives you a reward sooner rather than later from little effort, and then it makes you want to continue that behavior over time again and again. That's really what it is. You can build yourself a micro habit with the periodic table elements. That's why they're these little squares. That's just a reminder that if you do want to build yourself a micro habit, I would recommend you print the sheet and start writing ideas in these boxes already as we go through the actual lenses. I mentioned earlier that there is a resource library. If you just go to our YouTube channel and type the number of each element, you'll find videos. You'll find playlists for each lens. But I also have built a download button here for the high-res periodic table if you want to print it out. You have a library with structured videos, playlists, and so on for each of the numbered elements that you are curious to find out more about. So there's plenty of resources on the website. That is also a link that you should find in your email. As we go through this video, I'm going to add any referencing to videos that I mention so that you can see them as a pop-up. Before we go into the actual data and your whole lenses and all the different dashboards, just a little step back onto the actual periodic table. The periodic table, as you can see, has got 4 levels. The top level is what we call human-to-human communication, H2H communication. That is really what most people think of as communication. When I say, how do you communicate at work? That's what people are referencing. And most often it's like the very basic informing others. I've sent a message with my information, I've communicated, done. But that's only one out of 130 things that you can do to communicate. There's a lot more to it. When you start looking, find that the human to self communication, which is the invisible bottom layer of what's going on in your head. That's the mental models that filter what you're seeing from the outside and give it meaning. One of the classic examples is with conflicts. For example, in the Nordics, people often have a fear of conflicts and they consider conflicts by cultural basis to be negative usually. A conflict, the mental model conflicts that will open up in one of the lenses and the needs lens is actually a neutral. There is a good conflict and a bad conflict. It's how you use it and how you engage in that. That's what we're going to look at. Now, that mental model, when you just reframe what is a conflict, good versus bad conflict, how to recognize them, that awareness, that mental model can literally unlock completely new ways of behaving in usually tense or hostile situations. That's just one mental model. If you want to make quantum leaps in your personal development, that's the level to focus on. The top level is more just like practical ways that you can activate the bottom level. But this is the place where you're going to find the most value, the most interesting food for thought in these white levels. Okay. How did we come up with this idea of the head-up display, and what's this head-up display coming from is we did a projection exercise imagining in 2050, when technologies move forward, what would it be like to have this kind of wearable glasses? Imagine that these would be like AR glasses, right, that you wear and that have a little head-up display, like in the video game, that would show you first-person point of view, your communication patterns when you're communicating with other people, almost like a sort of live feedback loop telling you, warning, you're about to get in a conflict, tone down something like that. So this was the brief I gave to a French designer who was specialized in designing real head-up displays for helicopter pilots rather than the game ones that look really fancy but they're actually not really usable. So I gave him this brief of, imagine that you're designing a head-up display dynamic system which you could wear in glasses, and that you would have when we actually can do all of that recognition automatically with some kind of AI and machine learning. This is what we did. I'm going to just symbolize, put on the glasses. This is what they look like. I'm just going to now hide behind my head-up display. This is Anu and Elena from one of our previous videos, miming out two colleagues having food in a Chinese restaurant. And this was just like color coding or color decoding, we could say, their interaction. Now you can look at it from different lenses at the top. The first lens is influence. Now, what does influence bring? Influence is going to be where you're looking at the dynamics between self or other, me, other. That is a really important thing in determining how influence happens. We are, in this particular example, you can see some text in the background. This is when you actually start drilling down on a snapshot of communication, this scene. You can only really do that from a point of view of a person. We call that the anchor. So this head-up display, you'll see in many places. I'll show it in different moments. You'll see it also in our other videos on YouTube. It's always first person. If you're used to video games, it's like first person shooter kind of thing. It's you and your communication always that we're talking about. Otherwise, it's impossible to color code. Attitude is like the horizon. It's looking at what's your attitude essentially to change in communication. It's often an invisible thing that actually makes a big difference. This is the balance of chaos and order, mostly to do with how you waste time. Flow is how much you're enjoying the conversations. Alignment is a lot to do with emotional intelligence and empathy and congruence. Needs is where you see the root of many conflicts. It's understanding what are the needs that are being expressed and communicated. Ego lens is where we look at your role and your blind spots of how you communicate and what you communicate with others. Dynamics is the lead follow dynamics between people and all of that, how it builds relations or not. Each of those lenses, we're going to be, as we go along, building more videos with even using these lenses to color code Netflix content, YouTube editorial content, and things that people send us as well. But in this particular video, I'm just going to go through the lenses from the data perspective. It's time for you to open your dashboard on slide 10. Slide 10, you'll find this diagram. This is really a calibration. So when you're thinking of your communication, you're looking at improving your Mundo level, your macro level, your Meso level, or your micro level of communication. What is the Mundo? Mundo is like your public figure. That's your social media. That's you as an individual, your personal branding, or if you're communicating as a company, it's your social media brand. It's also PR if you're working in that field, and it's all the public domain stuff. That's, for example, talking about how you write your posts in social media. Macro is your organization, whether it's public or private. There's a macro level, which is governance. And that's going to be looking at how you communicate in very official, structural way. It could be internal comms if you're working as part of a management team. It's also the communication between governance bodies like investors. And if you're a startup, for example, it's your investor relations. Meso level is your day-to-day team. So that's if you're in a part of a structural unit, or if you're a coach, for example, that's who you're coaching. That level is your daily communication. And micro level is the communication in your head. It's like the metacognitive layer, really. It's the communication from you to you, human to self. For example, if you don't know which level to go, I would strongly recommend you start from the micro level, which is start from yourself. Start from understanding your own behavior without trying to fix anything on the outside. Then you can work your way up and start using micro habits, for example, to change different levels. But at first, really having a solid understanding of how you are communicating to yourself is going to be a huge step forward. So when you answered the scan, you noticed that there was this icons there with pictures of situations, and there were 3 questions asking you about all your situations, the most common, and then the most challenging. This is the reason why this scan is called a snapshot, or satellite scan snapshot of your communication behaviors, because it's like taking a picture of the particular situations you had at that time. That means that it will change. Your communication data that you're getting here will be different from one moment to the next, one situation to the next. That's really what makes this different to all the other tests out there that are, for example, measuring personality, is that this is intended to be used as a snapshot that you can measure before and after, and shifts in communication behaviors. In my case, I've measured 6 times, and over the COVID, I've noticed shifts in my behaviors, quite natural adaptation to how hybrid work has evolved. I can measure that in my data from different scans. The situations that were measured, there have been 20 situations that we put in here. The taxonomy is mostly focused on work. So this scan is really, at the moment, calibrated for you to think about your work and how it interacts with your home, rather than the other way around. We're currently working on a personal version of this same scan for couples. But here, this is more about work, co-creation, conflicts, hobbies, which are sometimes programmed into work time as work rewards, customer service, being part of events. Feedback is a surprisingly difficult topic for many people, giving and receiving feedback. Governance, for example, in startups with investor relations, and how you bring your work at home at that touch point as well is sometimes challenging for people. Coaching, for example, if you're a leader doing coaching leadership, or a coach or scrum master, or somebody working with helping others, that's a touch point that's often quite challenging for people with communication. Obviously, meetings, negotiation, and networking for some, the whole small talk, social anxiety, presentations in smaller gatherings or bigger public speaking gatherings, with also recruiting, like how do you communicate in the right way in a recruitment to really not take the wrong person, is quite challenging as well sometimes. Research communication, if you're doing, for example, anthropology like me, or if you've been doing market research, how does that communication change and how does it work? The patterns, behavior. Sales, that's a big ask, how to boost sales with metacognitive communication. Team building is on the rise in terms of popularity. When we've measured team building, it seems that the how to build collective intelligence and trust is still a big topic. Teamwork, obviously, and training, workshops, and so on. We've got quite a few situations finishing with self-reflection, which in some workplaces is actually part of their work situations, and it's programmed and scheduled. This is how your data is shown for your situations of communication. So this is the whole of your situations at the time of the scan. This is most common, and this is the ones, or the one that you have ticked as being the most challenging. You might change these. If you look at them after a few months, you could change them again. So this is not like a finite thing. What's really important are these 2. The common situations are where you'll have the most opportunities for practicing your micro habits if you're designing a micro habit. And the most challenging is where you might get the biggest win. If it's like a big pain that you're trying to challenge yourself with communication, then you might want to pick one of these challenging situations to practice, or really learn stuff in communication to solve that problem. In my case, for example, if I just zoom in and show you, the most challenging is co-creation. Despite me being very used to running co-creation workshops, I still find it really challenging, because actually there's an interesting link between conflicts and creativity. So in fact, to have creativity, you need a certain amount of conflicts, which is why many people don't realize how difficult it is to be creative and innovative. It's not just because people are not creative, it's often just because it generates conflict. A good conflict is really just creative tension. In my case, it's really challenging. So I know that's a place that if I want to make myself feel better about moving forward in my behavior and communication, that's a good place to practice. You could be using this template, the micro habit template. I like to write all the common situations in here and just have them on my sheet at hand. I would put then co-creation, and I would put probably feedback at the moment. These are two situations, and perhaps one of the very common ones that I know is like daily meetings. I would just add these here as just suggestions for the trigger later. That's really how to use these situations. Just jot down the ones that are either really interesting for you to practice your challenges on, or places where you have a lot of regularity, like common situations where you know you're going to get a lot of practice and a lot of self-awareness. This section here is about micro habits and designing yourself a simple micro habit you can activate. Normally this happens in a coaching session. So what I'm sharing with you is basically my process for designing micro habits. It might be that you don't follow this explanation the way you would like to, in which case I invite you to just book me a session and we can do it together. Most people find it enough to just use the templates and think about it for themselves and just try it out. Rapid prototype your behavior changes and just try things out for fun. I'm going to walk you through now how I do it so that you can follow that for yourself. Don't worry if it doesn't make too much sense for you, because there might be gaps in how you understand the data still that would make it difficult for you to do what you think and what you feel, which is upstream from your behaviors, which are what you say and what you do. All of this comes often on autopilot. So a micro habit is really saying, okay, let's create ourselves a trigger that switches off the micro pathway that we have in our brain and switches it off and replaces it with a new behavior, just a completely new pathway that you create. And if you do it enough times, by repetition and the rewards that you get from it, if it does give you some rewards, it will create a habit loop that will sustain itself, and you won't have to do very much effort. It will just become ingrained in your behavior, just like driving a car. You don't think too hard about driving a car once you've driven for years. You could create these habit loops for yourself. You can add several habit loops together. There's plenty of ways that you can create a habit that then acts as a trigger for another habit, and you can, what James Clear calls stacking, you can do that too. So the first thing to identify is your trigger. In a micro habit, I like to just divide it into 5 pieces. So the trigger is, what is the situation that gets your autopilot off? If you're looking at the white template that's called micro habit template, you'll notice that under trigger, there's a few words. There's cadence, duration, situation. I basically think of the situation in terms of either a relationship, a place, a team, a job, a touch point, or even a channel. So a channel could be Slack or Facebook. That's the trigger that brings the awareness for me. That's the beginning of my micro habit. It could be a particular relation with a particular person, time of day, meeting, situation of communication, so on. So any of those things can become a trigger for you to go, oh, okay, notice something needs to change, try a new behavior. Then comes the intention. Generally, the trigger is a good thing to look at your challenging situations as a starting point. Like we wrote down on the sheet at the beginning, I wrote down co-creation, feedback, daily meetings as starting point. So those are good candidates for a trigger because they're relevant to me. You might do the same with your challenging or common situations and think of one of those as a basis for your trigger. And if it doesn't work, you can use something else as a trigger. The cadence, duration, and situation is really the 3 things you need. Cadence is how often, how regularly. Duration is how long is it going to take, realistically. Is it a 30-second thing or is it a 20-minute thing? Because it's going to make a huge difference on how it works. Then you look at the intent. With congruent communication, you always need to have the 3 aligned. So this micro habit idea is to build you by design a habit that what we call in design affords, that influences you naturally without having to do any effort to be congruent and trustworthy by having a clear intention, clear non-verbal, and a clear word. So the verbal level, non-verbal level, intention level built in together that hopefully are followed by a reward. An intention might be, for example, in my case, I'd like to be respectful. In a co-creation session, non-verbally, I would check the time, for example, a green timing, and a word might be I ask a green question. When would be the right time for us to have this co-creation? So my trigger might be when I do a co-creation session, my new micro habit is I check with the respect the right time with a green question. And the reward I might get is better response rate to my email invitation to go to that co-creation from the team members, for example. you can build a microhabit with the periodic table blocks. For that, you're going to probably need to identify which are the periodic table elements that are most relevant for you. Another way of doing this, which I do as a visual, take the white cheat sheet that has at the top elements. So it's the same periodic table with just like gray numbers. What I like to do in a coaching session, for example, is that I just jot down the elements that are either standing out as something really strong or something that might be an interesting question to explore. Sometimes I just put plus and minuses, and then I identify some that I think might be interesting. Occasionally I even put if it's a trigger or something. But for example, I might highlight, and this is obviously going to be hard to do if you don't know the periodic table, so that's why you have this QR code where you can download a high-res version of this for your phone. But if you're looking at, you start to see patterns of, okay, there's these elements that are interesting. So that's another way of looking at it, is thinking, how do I build a microhabit out of these Lego blocks? Which one is going to be a trigger? It's a bit of a Sherlock Holmes exercise, which our coaching team loves, because it's a nice flowing challenge to think of, okay, which is the trigger out of these that would make sense based on all the thinking. In your case, it's easier for you to do because obviously you are you. When I'm coaching somebody, I have to make a lot of assumptions and check, but with yourself, you can go quite fast and just identify, okay, that's the trigger. Clearly what I need to do is pick an intention, and I need to be green. So it's one of the green non-verbals and one of the green intentions. So I'm going to be congruent. This is microhabit. I'm hoping that my reward is going to be psychological safety here. So here's my reward. In some cases, it might take you only 10 seconds to draw up a clear microhabit from noting which are the elements in the periodic table that are significant for you. You have this other sheet where you can then write them down, and in my case, if I were to do it with this, so this is element, I just did this pretty randomly, so 1303 would be my microhabit. Then I would have 5402 here, 5305, 5206, or if I was being less lazy, I would not write the numbers, I would draw the icon and write it to myself. If I'm doing a coaching session, I'll just put the icons in there, obviously. This is just to keep you focused on what's the key takeaway from this whole video, so that you don't walk away with this utter confusion about all these different concepts, but that you can choose one focus point for you to literally play with new communication behaviors and tap into the powers of metacognitive communication. So that's how I would basically build a microhabit. Generally, I would start from looking at the notes on all the lenses and thinking, in my case, there was a big issue around congruence. Okay, so that's important. I was a little bit conflict prone, so I might need to look at the needs lens. Flow, I was in anxiety, so that might be interesting to look at. I would generally, before I even go into the microhabit, I would just do a quick summary of what's been going on in all of this. If you've taken notes on your sheet, then it's easier. And then that helps me narrow down where I want to choose my microhabit. If you've identified certain elements that are something that you really want to learn more about, then you can actually go and look at our website where you have the library section. The icon at the moment is a popcorn icon. This is basically our YouTube library organized into drop-down menus. It's being filled up every week. That's one way of looking at more content numbered and referenced in the periodic table system. If you want to just type in YouTube in our channel, the number of each periodic table element, you will find it in our YouTube channel with that number of 4 digits, which is why we're using it. You might just go in there and follow if you want to learn more about, for example, ego and conflicts. So well done on getting to the end of this video. Do subscribe, and you'll find that when we release them, we're going to be first streaming in YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to both YouTube and the Twitch if you're following streaming, and you'll be able to ask questions. Go straight in. If, for example, filming a topic or we have some special guests, you can actually ask questions through the chat. So that's worth joining as well for that. My twin is going to be doing some more theory videos on science learning, more about these mental models, for example, like we've been talking about a lot today. If you have any particular feedback for us, green, blue, or red, I'd be really happy to hear, and they can be in the comments, or you can just ping me in the email. I'm always keen to get some interesting builds, including praise, by the way, for what you've got out of this particular Scan Plus video. Hopefully, you've got some new insights, new directions, possibly even a micro habit to actually go and try out and build one step better communication habits with other people, even inside your head towards yourself. Even that is very valuable. May your communication help you build better chemistry wherever you go. Thank you.